Scott. So I'm gonna give you some statistics, start off with a few things, give you some context on some of the things that I've learned a bit over time. So 129% is the increase in the number of startups in New Orleans in the last 10 years. 56% is the rate of entrepreneurship exceeding the national average. In New Orleans right now, for every 100,000 residents, there are about 500 new startups happening. The average in the United States is about 300 per 100,000. 2%, this is the percentage of wealth that is controlled by minority-owned businesses in the city of New Orleans. 2 times, that's the rate of poverty in New Orleans compared with the rest of the nation. And 4 times is the rate of incarceration in New Orleans as compared with the rest of the nation. And it's obvious that there's some real contradictions in these statistics, you know, and they're all sort of impacted by the entrepreneurial platform, which I work within. And maybe more than the contradictions are the hypocrisy around some of those things. So I wanted to share with you, when I was talking with Amanda and Stacy about what might be useful here, especially since some of the things that is going on in Las Vegas, some of our experience in New Orleans in dealing with some of the issues, some of those contradictions, some of those conflicts and tension. Because we had some, you know, good ideas, we thought were good ideas, but you also find that even with the best of intentions, you make massive mistakes. So hopefully that resonates with a few of you. So I began my life, I used to joke about it, that, you know, doing God's work, that I was luckier than most people in advertising. And so the core of advertising is that opportunity to build a business, right? So you're supposed to help somebody grow their business. But as you work in the industry, and I know there's a lot of people from the advertising industry here, you start to think that, you know, maybe you'd like to help certain businesses grow, but not all businesses grow. And what I found myself in more situations where Mr. Karl Marx's flattering commentary on advertising started to ring a little too true. So I decided to adopt more of this sort of persona, and so old people in the room tell the young people who that is. Yeah, there you go. Good. That somebody's out there. How old people? And so I co-founded, along with a couple of other intensely naive, crazy people, something called the Idea Village, which we incubated inside of our advertising agency. And this was about 15 years ago. And the single concept around Idea Village, again, sort of a naive idea, was that we would use entrepreneurship as a platform to convene people, bring them together, and to create social and economic change in a city that desperately needed it. And then I got involved with a handful of startups. So we created the city's first co-working space in our ad agency. And we kind of invited people to surround us. Some were nonprofits, some were startups, some we'd invested in. But it seemed like a good kind of rich creative environment. It was good for us. We could draw off that energy, and also we could kind of give a little something back to some of those companies. So one of the companies that came out of this, it's called Naked Pizza, and that's been scratching its way around the world with, with the idea that the fast food infrastructure, arguably one of the most successful business infrastructures in the world, can be used as a Trojan horse to introduce foods that help instead of harm. Very simple. But if you travel the world, as I've had a chance to do, and you go into developing countries, you'll see that, you know, as soon as that area hits a certain critical mass, and you'll find that actually in inner cities as well, you'll see fast food, you know, figuring out a way to monetize it. So the idea was that it wasn't really fast food that was bad, but it was the product they were offering. The infrastructure was actually quite elegant. So Naked Pizza, kind of rounding out that top 10 list in Fast Company for most innovative companies, has been something that's given me an opportunity to put an idea together and actually grow it. But when people think about the things that have been going on in New Orleans and a lot of this change and some of the ideas that have come together, they oftentimes think that it was Katrina that was the reason for that. That Katrina was sort of the beginning of this change of attitude and this way of people thinking. But actually, it was this. So it was a 50-year decline in the city of New Orleans, where we had lost about 30% of our population. There was a complete lack of diversity in the economy. You had abject poverty. It was the murder capital. You had loss of talent. There really was some serious issues that had manifested in the city. And what we found was that the reactions to Katrina were actually reactions to these things that had been manifesting. Katrina was just sort of an exclamation point on this, and sort of an undeniable moment where you could react to some of these things that you intuitively knew were wrong within your community that weren't really going so well. So it was sort of just a visceral kind of reaction to those conditions, and it was sort of a sense of helplessness that was around that. But it was in that process that we kind of discovered a little bit about ourselves. So whenever you're confronted with those severe circumstances in your life, the fight or flight sort of instinct takes over, and you could not blame people for leaving the city, and they had. A third of the population had left the city, just like Detroit, which has lost somewhere around 30 or 40% of its population. But the other reaction was to get angry, but also do something about it. And what made sense about that, I think, in terms of how we were thinking about New Orleans, thinking about the Katrina reaction, was that embedded in that was really sort of that thing that we all look for. And I think people in this room can identify that reason why you do, what you put yourself in front of. And really that idea of finding that reason, finding those things that matter, I think are very important, especially for the people that I think come to a place like this to talk about things, about using entrepreneurship and how to make the world a little stronger place, a little healthier place. So, your reason is sort of your act of rebellion. And it's a simple, it's not to reduce it to a t-shirt, but it is that place that really just sort of fire up that energy. And it was very useful for us. The other thing that Katrina delivered to New Orleans was essentially a head start. The city of New Orleans got a head start on the global recession. So the way that we were reacting to those severe circumstances, that big exclamation mark, was actually a lot of the things that started to manifest in communities around the world after the recession hit. So as the wheels came off, as the property values plummeted, as the foreclosures crept in, people started to behave in a certain way, and we learned quite a bit about ways to react. But the other thing that we sort of found out about this was that although the severity of that situation, whether it was a recession or a hurricane or a tsunami or an earthquake in Christchurch, where we've had a chance to do some collaborations, really were actually more symptoms of a long festering set of problems. So maybe they weren't as severe as some of the things that were going on in New Orleans prior to Katrina, but what you found as people started to reset and recalibrate, and I'm sure you see this in this own community, is that you start to think about, intuitively you sense that business was misbehaving, that institutions were failing, that certain ideas really weren't coming together in the most useful and effective way. And so it was interesting to see what people were really looking for, and especially the entrepreneur platform was successful for, was that it could activate that grassroots, bottom-up sort of expression within the community, manifesting within entrepreneurship. Culturally authentic, and using entrepreneurship not just to create jobs. Sure, jobs are important, wealth creation, tax base, but ultimately people wanted some control over their future, so that ability to self-determine. So we've had some success in New Orleans, and it's cool when Forbes and The Atlantic and Inc. throw these bouquets at you, but the truth of it is it's taken 15 years for us to get to this place, and it really, time is a factor that oftentimes is not deeply considered when it comes to this sort of change and bringing a community around. And I think the other thing that you sort of gets missed in that process is that you have to make a lot of mistakes on the way to getting to that success and bringing the community into some sort of health and some sort of collaboration where people actually are working together to build a better, stronger community. So one of the things that we learned when we formed Idea Village was this notion of starting small, but making sure we're considering a larger tent that would accommodate the rest of the community. So there were several issues that we really wanted to address when we started with this. And we started with a very simple business plan competition that was back in 1998, 97, 98. And the idea was to say who would pop up their hand and say, I'm interested in entrepreneurship. So we flew a flag that said entrepreneurship matters. And not are we just trying to find good ideas and good businesses, but we want to create a platform of engagement, of connectedness, that ultimately will allow for people to come together and use that platform as a means of social and economic change. But we made a classic mistake. So when I say it was small, it was about 5 guys, and they were all white. And in a city that's 70% African American, one of the very issues we wanted to create, a sense of inclusiveness, a sense of opportunity where people could participate and felt like they had this opportunity, we were sending exactly the wrong signal. And what we found as we worked through that process was it was almost impossible to establish the necessary trust within the community to bring this damaged, sort of dysfunctional community together. So several years later, through persistence, we finally had an opportunity to bring the Urban League into a conversation where we would take some of their most interesting business ideas and we would collaborate with them and support those business ideas and bring those ideas forward, provide the technical expertise that were necessary to help them elevate it. But what we found when we got in the same room was that we weren't prepared for it. We really had not set our expectations, and it dissolved into a bitter argument. And the inclination at that time was just to walk away and say we couldn't do it. But the idea was that if we had failed at that particular moment, we knew that the whole thing, the whole idea of using entrepreneurship as that agent of change would have failed. That all bets were off at that particular time. If we couldn't use this neutral platform of creating opportunity for people, then we had failed. So we went back at it, and through persistence and the most amazingly difficult discussions, led by some really great people, we got people back to the table. We re-clarified our collective goals for the community. And we created an opportunity and a prototype, really, for ways to combine the platform of entrepreneurship with community organizations with vested interests in the community that extended well beyond race into other factors and other areas of the community that needed that type of attention and that type of innovation. So one of the things we learned in sort of that prototyping process was it was really important to stop taking credit for things. I mean, we initially had started in this kind of heroic branded experience under the idea of village umbrella, and we had to take that down and invite people into it. But it was via that prototyping and that understanding that last year we had 17 different community organizations supporting the concept and the platform of entrepreneurship by providing new ideas and businesses that were designed expressly to not only create jobs and wealth, but to solve problems in the community. And they came from areas of culture or gender or ethnicity or other sort of industry-specific areas. And in such a way that these were problems that the community said, these are important. We need innovation to come to the table. We need technical expertise. So one of those areas has been education. So I know we talked a little bit about education, and Kane was mentioning his work. So New Orleans has, had the most failed public school system in the country. I mean, by any measure, it was an embarrassment and a great tragedy. So following Katrina, the new environment, the reform environment, which is very complex, laid with all sorts of tension, became this destination for some of the brightest minds in the country and the world. And it's from that environment that we've been able to create a place that is able to identify that innovation and to provide scaffolding to it in order to create new business ideas and new concepts and to help leaders emerge that are actually taking political leadership roles, not only in New Orleans, but all over the world. And so now the manifestation of that is that you have about a half a dozen different investment funds around education and a very successful accelerator called 4.0 Schools that works with that. So the other area that we've gotten into is climate change and environment. New Orleans is one of the most vulnerable cities, municipalities in the world relative to increasing temperatures, to rising sea levels, and to other man-made issues such as the fact that we supply 40% of the oil and gas for the United States, and they've managed to carve up the coastline, whereas we lose about a football field of land about every 30 minutes in South Louisiana. But the good news is, by combining with the universities, with environmental groups, with corporations, we've been able to identify good ideas that not only solve the problem in New Orleans, in our region, but also are creating exportable business concepts and business ideas. So the thing that we've kind of learned is that, you know, the biggest problems really are among your best assets as a community, especially if you're working within the entrepreneurial platform. It's sort of you know, the core of that always is problem definition and solution, right? I mean, that's the thing that sort of gets people's juices going. So that has been one of those core recognitions within our work there, and it's started to manifest in so many different ways in terms of how we've been able to apply the platform. So the thing that I think everyone else recognizes in this room is that, you know, people are their happiest when they are solving the biggest problems. I think that's the new world that we've kind of created, and it was gratifying to see the discussion today about return on community and the way that people in the community are surrounding themselves. So I thank you for my 15 plus minutes. And